Hey everybody, it is the 23rd of June and we wanted to give you guys an update on this lengthy battle out of Idaho that we've been in all the way back to 2014, and I'll go through kind of the timeline where we're at and some issues about the legal case. And this began, guys, clear back in 2014. We were contacted by a bunch of suction dredge miners up in northern Idaho that were dredging the South Fork of the Clearwater. And some of these guys have been doing it for 40 plus years. And without any problems, without any incidents, the fish runs were great, blah, 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 you know, as you would expect. And then in 2014, the EPA pulled up all of the mining claim owners, their names, addresses, and all that stuff off of through the BLM, and they sent them threatening letters saying that if they dredged without a NPDES permit, which I'll explain in a second, if they dredged without obtaining that permit through the EPA, they would be fined $37,500 per day that they dredged, and the season is typically a month, so you can do the math on that. 30 days times 37,000 is quite a bit. So anyway, the NPDES is a part of the Clean Water Act, and it was passed in the early 2000s, I believe. And you know, everybody wants clean water and clean air and all that kind of stuff. And the act was basically written that if you add pollutants to a waterway that the federal government has control over, that you had to obtain a pollution discharge permit, and then you're basically asking permission. And so anyway, I challenge anybody out there to tell me what it is, because there's 130 some different pollutants that are listed under the Clean Water Act. You can get on the internet and look at it and find it. Is out of all of those 130 plus pollutants, which one of those? Any one of them, name one that a dredge adds during that activity. And the answer is you can't, because there isn't any pollutants. And it's kind of like we used the soup pot theory, which is a court case. It was, I want to say it was a district court, that if you dip a ladle into a pot of soup, let's say it's minestrone, and you lift it up and you pour it back in, which that's basically the activity of a suction dredge, are you adding anything? And the answer is no, you're not. The activity of suction dredging actually removes those type of pollutants, mercury and lead. For those of us that have dredged a long time, you know all the kinds of crap that ends up in your sluice box. Mercury, discarded or lost fishing weights, fish hooks, lures. Hell, we found old pocket knives. We found lids to wood stoves, all kinds of stuff. The activity of dredging removes those things because they get trapped into the sluice box. So there is nothing as far as the Clean Water Act that pollutes, nothing. So there's also a provision in the Clean Water Act that is what's called a citizen suit, and that is if a normal everyday citizen feels that the EPA is not enforcing the laws, these regulations under the Clean Water Act, that they can sue. And so that's what happened. So we go back to 2014, dredgers contacted us. We picked up a claim, and I think it was in 2015 was the first year that we went up there and dredged, and we had a lot of support for that. The sheriff was there of Idaho County. We had Senator Cheryl Nuxall was there, a couple of others. I want to even say that the current Attorney General for the state of Idaho right now, Raul Labrador, I think he was a House rep at the time. And anyway, we had a lot of support from folks like that because everybody was kind of getting fed up really with the tyrannical style government and taking over everything and every water and mud puddle and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we dredged and we challenged the EPA, hey, if we're polluting, then tell us what it is that we're adding, you know, that kind of stuff. And the EPA they would never ever do anything. They sent us threatening letters, but nothing was ever backed up. So then I think we dredged in 2016 again. Then we went up in 2018 and dredged for a month, which is the season, and we did so with a valid Idaho Department of Water Resources permit, which is what was required to dredge in the state. And it also said in there on page 5 that it's the only permit that was necessary. Excuse me. So anyway, we did that. Once we were done, we had dredging. We had to reclimate, and that means to basically restore the river back to its original condition before we left. And the funny thing is, we had two funny things. One is the fisheries biologist that was with the Forest Service up there in the Nez Perce National Forest came up and told us, I wish you guys could dredge bank to bank because you create perfect fish habitat. No kidding. So we'll come back to that too. But when IDWR came up to inspect, and this is the very last day of the season, they couldn't tell where we had dredged because we returned it back to its natural state, which is really unfortunate because when we create those holes and you've got big boulders and it's places for little fish to hide, they call it refugia. And I mean, we had tons of fish in our dredge hole. When we filled it back in, the river went back to being that deep, and the fish had nowhere to go. So they're a lot more susceptible to raptors and things like that. So anyway, so when we came out of the river and we're driving away, as my phone started blowing up when we got up out of Grangeville, and people had heard on the radio that a radical environmental group called Idaho Conservation League filed suit against me for polluting the South Fork of the Clearwater and destroying their fish habitat. Their fish habitat. Heck with the rights of the miners. So anyway, that started that battle, and that was in August of 2018. And here we are in June of 2024, $500,000 in attorney fees and all this other crap later. And I'll get to the point where we're at now. So initially when the lawsuit was filed, we found a law firm, a good one out of Denver, Colorado, and they started the process to fight this in Idaho, and it was I believe it was in Moscow, where the battle was going to take place, and it was with a federal judge that was appointed by Mr. Obama, and he was very well known for his rulings in favor of environmentalists. So we ended up going to court, and rather than him allowing us to really present the argument, I mentioned the fisheries biologist, yeah, we couldn't even present that as evidence to support the fact that we don't pollute. And he basically took his gavel and slammed it on the ground and said, yeah, I rule in favor of ICL. And that's basically what happened. It was just a railroad. I mean, it was an activist judge, in my opinion, that just railroaded us through. So then once you have an unfavorable ruling like that, your option is to appeal that. And so we did, and it goes to, in these western states here, it goes to what's called the Ninth Circuit, and it's a district court. And the district court, the Ninth Circuit, is really famous really for making really poor rulings and then having them overturned by the Supreme Court. So we ended up getting the Ninth Circuit. And our case was actually heard in Seattle. And again, we had, if you look at, there's 3 judges. There were 2 pretty far left judges that I believe one was appointed by Obama, one was appointed by Biden, and then we had a Trump appointee. So we ended up with a ruling, an unfavorable ruling, 2-1 against us. Now, when you get to that point, you only have one recourse left, and that is realistically to file at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is the end-all, be-all decider. The problem with the Supreme Court is you don't get a lot of cases that get heard by them. The last study we did, and I want to say it was 5 or 6 years ago, was about 3% of the cases. So anyway, so we'll get to that. Now, Pacific Legal Foundation, who is now representing me, they're the ones that just filed a cert petition to the Supreme Court. But before I get to that, I want to tell you basically what the argument is here. You guys know that we don't pollute. Everybody knows that, including probably ICL. But they're just trying to hope that, okay, the little railroad attempt that we went through the courts, they're just hoping that that holds and the Supreme Court won't hear this. But here's the problem, and this brings my case to have a little bit more visibility at the Supreme Court. So let me tell you about a couple of things. One is a shrimp trawler that is in North Carolina. And